Well, hi. I just went to America for the first time in 15 years and it was traumatic. They call Autoglass Safe Light. All the bathroom locks are these easily missable buttons on the door handles, and do you know what happens if you take too much Pepto-Bismol because of the absurd portion sizes at Olive Garden? Not even kidding, 2 days in it was hex code 0x6. Welcome back to the cafe, the tea is scalding. Earlier this year I was given the opportunity to attend the National Association of Music Merchants trade show in Anaheim, California to check out its offerings. NAMM represents all sorts of sub-industries within music, even down to housing a few landmarks in vocal synth history. Vocaloid's very first vocalists, Leon and Lola, were originally announced at NAMM 2004, and I even found this clip of distributor Big Fish Audio showing off Miku V3 English at NAMM 2014. 2025 was my very first time attending, and I could tell from the get-go that it was going to be big by the standards of a niche sub-industry, especially when it came to Synthesizer V, which is culturally the largest, most significant commercial vocal synth engine right now, at least on the western side of things. Synthesizer V Studio 2, a new editor by Dreamtonics, was announced in December 2024, Eclipsed Sounds, makers of the Starry Court, announced the new tone CHROMA line of vocalists, and my personal favourite news, my associate and good friend Natalie Nicole Gilbert, voice of Dreamtonics' Natalie Voicebank, was attending as well, so I landed myself an attendee pass and got down and dirty with the details. First thing I want to say before getting into the juicier parts is that attending was a truly wonderful and humbling experience. I've been in the community for a while, but rarely do I feel like I truly engage with it directly and make connections. Sometimes I just feel like a spectator who makes their contributions and then hides in a corner until there's something else for me to do. To contrast, NAMM was an extremely welcoming environment. Everyone there showed me so much love and kindness that I can only hope I returned while I was there. For those curious, the British accent stat buff is a real thing, and I think it helped in making me more approachable. The vocal synth industry has branched out in all sorts of directions we would never have expected if you were around during events like the V5 drought of the late 2010s, and while vocal synths have always been present at NAMM in some way, it's nice to see it reaching a stage where it's a near guaranteed zone for V-synth enthusiasts to gather and talk frankly about the industry's current status. All of that being said, I have a few disclaimers and qualifiers I want to run through for the purpose of transparency and integrity, just so you understand the perspective this video is written from. First, for full disclosure, I did not personally apply for NAMM, nor did I purchase my attendee pass. I was invited by an entity within the vocal synth industry, but the extent of that invitation was just the ability to enter the show floor, and I had to finance the trip on my end. Fun fact, it was actually my very first solo flight, so I had to overcome a lot of anxiety in order to attend the event, and I'm happy to report it all went off without a hitch, and I came out of it feeling like a more experienced traveller. Just call me the TSA whisperer. But all the same, it's under these circumstances that I want to emphasise that I am an independent writer and pundit. All views and opinions in this video are my own and nobody else's, and I do not represent any other individuals or entities that are mentioned throughout the duration. Secondly, the information I'm showing you all today consists of anything that was publicly available, and that the exhibitors were comfortable relaying to any attendees at the event. Some information was verbally told to me on the show floor, while some of it was what I inferred from trying out the public demo booths that were on display, and I'll be trying my hardest to specify the circumstances of each point I make. All of that being said, I have left this video a little late, and since then, a lot of details post-NAMM, including the ability to pre-order SynthV 2, have popped up since then, so I will be doing my best to keep this video as up-to-date as possible right up until the upload date, even if it means adding annotated amendments on top of my currently recorded narration. And lastly, I just wanted to be clear that while I intend to be as transparent as possible with what I learned from the event, my primary focus above all is to relay this information not impartially, but still within the basis of good faith. Those of you who have followed my work for a long time know that I have in the past leaned heavily on consumer advocacy as an exclusive perspective, but after 5 or so years of reflection, I've concluded that all that focus does is encourage a narrow and dogmatic understanding of media to the point of being self-destructive. There are elements of what was presented that I intend to critique, and a lot of decisions being made that I disagree with on paper, but I wish to underline all of that critique with what I believe to be the circumstances as to why these decisions have been made, and what the intention could be in a future industry, so we can make informed decisions in future. It's immeasurably important to be critical of other people's work, especially if your expectation as a customer is to make a substantial investment, but all the same, I think it's important to draw a line in the sand, to look at what an entity intends to do, and come to a conclusion on whether or not they are actually interested in doing what you ask of them for your own sake. Like, we all hate the Peer Pro Super PAC, feedback, but it's been out long enough to ask ourselves if we actually expected anything different from Krypton Future Media, and if what we want is anything they're actually interested in producing. Frankly, I'm tired of being angry all the time and expecting returns from people who have zero intention in doing what I ask, regardless of if I represent the major consumer base, because it's an exercise in futility. The industry members who attended NAMM made it very clear to me that they have their ear to the ground and welcome any and all anxieties or grievances we may have. So in turn, it makes sense that we deconstruct why their future output is being structured the way it is, and it's why I encourage anyone watching this video to not just skim through the details in isolation to fuel a sense of hype culture, but to please hear what I have to say about each area and communicate directly with industry members if you have any feedback. And the feedback in question presumably can't be vague subtweets, sorry. Now, to kick things off, I want to talk about new voice banks that are on the horizon, not just because there's a lot of interesting things to say about them, but because new software like SynthV 2 is going to be such a beast that rounds out everything. I want to leave it till last. So let's start off with the all-new vocal series, Tone CHROMA. While I've been recording, I've been occasionally flubbing and referring to the new bank series as CHROMA, which is an entirely different thing. For those who don't know, Eclipsed Sounds are a third-party vocal synth developer who create voice banks for Dreamtonics' engine, Synthesizer V. They're a team of long-time enthusiasts known for the critically acclaimed Starry Court vocalists, Solaria, Asterion, Saros, and Nil. In the lead up to NAMM, the team posted 2 atmospheric teasers on their social media pages unveiling a new line of vocalists succeeding the Starry Court, simply titled Phase 2 Tone CHROMA. According to Eclipsed Sounds' website, while the Starry Court focused on creating genre-flexible vocals, the goal with Phase 2 is to create single-genre vocalists that are based on community feedback. Typically, when a new company is establishing themselves, they start off with smaller-scale projects that have a wide market appeal in order to build up their reputation and resources, and I think that's what's going on here. As a reminder, when working on their very first voice bank, Solaria, the team had to find investors and crowdfund in order to make that release achievable. The Starry Court appears to be a proof of concept that established Eclipsed Sounds within the community, while Tone CHROMA appears to be the masterpiece, as it were, the fully fleshed, ambitious idea that Eclipsed are now able to realize. So, on top of the voice banks themselves, I think this new series represents a turning point for Eclipsed where they're able to truly represent themselves to us. When NAMM started, the 2 teased voice banks were officially revealed, R01 HXVOC and V01 GALENAIA. While at this time the 2 do not have revealed voice providers or designs, both vocals were fully usable at NAMM, and as a matter of fact, I was able to try them in SynthV 2. Just to be clear, I was not able to get confirmation on if these 2 banks would be released for SVS1 or if they would be exclusively on SVS2, but when I tried them on the show floor, they were both running on SynthV 2, and I could use SynthV 2's exclusive functions with them. HXVOC is a masculine English vocal who is designed for rock and heavy metal. He has a very loud, guttural tone, an incredibly wide range, and he has a vocal mode that accomplishes a very high-quality screamo effect. GALENAIA is a feminine Spanish vocal who is designed for opera. She has a very rich, mature tone. Once again, the overall range of the voice is very wide, and she's incredibly responsive to SVS2's new tuning interface. These are 2 vocal types that, from personal experience, have been highly requested by the community for years. These aren't the first instances of hard rock and opera vocals in V-Synths, however. Vocaloid 2 saw opera vocals in the form of Prima and Tonio, and past vocalists like Hiyama Kyoteru and Iya have had rock voice banks which solidify their voices. But given the technology at the time, genre vocals in Vocaloid were always a bit conceptual and experimental. Either they didn't deliver exactly on the demands of a genre, or they just required a lot of extensive tuning to accomplish those genres cleanly. But here we have 2 genre vocals that nail their vocal types straight out of the box, while still allowing a lot of room for customization. What I immediately noticed is that despite still being in development, both HXVOC and GALENAIA were ridiculously clean. They're both vocals that utilize a lot of sustains in their genres, and very rarely did I notice any of that distinct engine noise that I typically expect from SynthV when it has to process lengthy sustains. No fuzz, no static, no faltering pitch. Those teasers were not a promise of what the voice banks could achieve, they were a representation of what they can achieve, and what they did achieve effortlessly in front of me. But while they were pretty solid to listen to at the event, those who weren't able to attend did have a few queries. First one being that I wasn't the one who put the Union Jack behind the Eclipsed Sounds booth, that just kinda happened on its own. While I was testing the 2 out, both HXVOC and GALENAIA did have vocal modes for me to try out so I could test their overall genre flexibility, because that was a very common question about them. But I do want to note that none of the modes had names attached to any of them, and I was told they were a work in progress, so I didn't make any notes of how many modes there were or what they sounded like, because it was so subject to change. The vocal modes allowed for a lot of tonal change, so they could sing with more or less intensity in their voice or move into different characteristics, but on the whole, the vast majority of their available modes were still designed to reflect reflect their chosen genre. This next point is where I want to reiterate that this is a work in progress, but each bank did have at least one what I like to call stable mode, which sounded a bit more pop-influenced and leveled out to provide a bit more genre flexibility, similar to what you can hear in Dreamtonics' Voicebanks. But even when that mode was in place, HXVOC is still a rock vocal, GALENAIA is still an opera vocal, and while nothing stops the vocal synth community from using vocalists however they want, it's very clear in just trying out the banks myself that Tone CHROMA is focusing on specialism, and it's not a continuation of the versatility shown in the Starry Court. And I do think that will be this series' strongest selling point. If you've been in the scene long enough, you'll know that SynthV's overall build-up coincided with the expansion of the entire vocal synth industry. New companies, new engines, just a huge boom in the 2020s after Yamaha appeared to be tired of supporting Vocaloid during the V5 era. Since then, not only have dozens of voice banks debuted, but the overall level of versatility has increased thanks to new engine developments. We are now at the stage where no matter what vocalist you buy, depending on the engine, they are now capable of singing in multiple expressions and languages right out of the box. And in an era where almost every voice bank is capable of accomplishing everything a user needs, that means the number of unique selling points a voice bank can have has decreased. This has unfortunately led to a sense of oversaturation in the industry, not dissimilar to the Vocaloid 3 era, where new vocalists release that don't necessarily provide any clear, explicit gimmicks or selling points, because expression and language no longer qualify as unique traits a voice bank can exclusively own. For example, there's a lot to be liked about Micah as a singer, but it can't be denied that part of her commercial appeal was being the one of 3 Vocaloids that could sing in Spanish and phoneme bend into other linguistic possibilities. So when browsing voice banks, the only 2 starting points you can go for in the modern industry are if you like a character design and if you like the vague and malleable timbre of the voice provider. With this in mind, I firmly believe Tone CHROMA will satisfy a gap that is currently present in the market by returning to the legacy design system of making vocalists that are marketed around a handful of functionalities with the promise that it will perform those limited functions in a more committed fashion. Like, Felicia may have an optional operatic vocal mode, but it's clear when using it that it has more of a rock opera inflection, and Felicia's more stage musical vocal tone will continue to come into play as opposed to the more committed classical opera tone GALENAIA offers. And while the market has plenty of masculine English vocalists that can theoretically accomplish hard rock, HXVOC's commitment towards the genre is going to act as a major USP that will make users want to try him out regardless of their current collection. At this point in time, both HXVOC and GALENAIA are still in development with no confirmed release dates, pricing, or engine compatibility, but nevertheless, I hope what I tried of the banks themselves fills a few gaps of uncertainty for some of you. I just think they're neat. That just leaves SynthV Studio 2 in terms of new stuff that was at NAMM, but before I discuss the editor itself, I wanted to quickly go over what this editor means for users in terms of voicebank compatibility and what will happen to your current collection. This section will be a blend of info I was able to squeeze out at the event and what was revealed the following month online. As was shown on the livestream, vocalists have a distinct 2 next to their names when loaded into the SVS2 editor. As was later revealed by Dreamtonics, all AI voicebanks for SynthV 1 will be compatible with SynthV 2, but in order for any of them to use SynthV 2's new features, such as the recently revealed Korean language support, it needs to be a voicebank upgrade that was developed with SynthV 2 in mind. As such, alongside pre-orders for SynthV 2 itself, which will be releasing on the 21st of March, you can also pre-order specialized SynthV 2 versions of all of Dreamtonics' banks and upgrade the SynthV 1 versions for a discounted upgrade fee. For a point of reference, think of it like how Vocaloid banks need to have a V4 for you to purchase separately if you wanted to use the growl parameter. At Dreamtonics' booth, just about every Dreamtonics bank was available as an SV2 upgrade, and it appears that third-party developers will also be following this model, as Eclipsed Sounds' booth had the Starry Court usable in SynthV 2, all 4 of which with 2s next to their names. Dreamtonics have also disclosed that upgrade plans for their third-party developers will be disclosed separately by the third parties themselves. This means that a third party potentially has free reign to charge however much they want for their upgrade model, but we'll just have to wait and see on that front. At Dreamtonics' booth, I was assured that one of Dreamtonics' priorities was ensuring that the entire legacy of SynthV was usable in SVS2. When I asked them about standard concatenative voice banks, I was told that they were working on a system that would allow those older banks to function on SVS2, but that due to differing technology they would sound different compared to how they sounded on the previous engine. And this was clarified later with Dreamtonics stating on one of their store pages that Saki's original standard voice bank would be receiving a Plus upgrade. For those who don't know what SynthV Plus upgrades are, they're basically the act of taking a standard voice bank and using it as training data to effectively convert the bank into AI while still preserving their concatenative timbre. The most I was able to wrestle out of DT is they're going to use this system to bring their own standard voice banks onto SynthV 2 and encourage third parties who also had standard voice banks to do the same, so actual direct compatibility of standard banks straight onto SynthV 2 is uncertain at this point, but we at least have a process in place that partially circumvents that, and with the amount of AI exclusive features in play like expressions and cross-lingual, this could very well breathe new life into these vocals. If Eleanor Standard gets an SV2 Plus bank, that will be a day one purchase and you will have to block me on Twitter for 3 months. But we can only speculate. Let's take a look at what SynthV 2 actually was and what I was able to find. Dreamtonics announced Synthesizer V Studio 2 on December 2024, alongside the mention of them having demo booths for it at NAMM 2025. And then literally the morning the exhibit halls opened, while I was in the queue for bag checks, Dreamtonics aired a live stream where Kanra and Miguel, Dreamtonics' founder and product specialist respectively, showed off the software's features to the public. Don't get me wrong, it was good that they had publicly available information on the software for people who were not able to fly out to Anaheim on short notice, but all the same, when that stream aired, I was low-key in the back of my mind like, no, my exclusive. Also, Miguel confirmed that the V in SynthV also represents the Roman numeral for 5, meaning therefore, Synth 5 is a valid pronunciation and y'all were just mean to me for no reason back in 2019. As many of you already saw in the live stream, SynthV 2 has a very familiar interface, and when you look at it purely on the basis of how many new features does it have, it seems like a very marginal upgrade, and initially I wasn't all that impressed, but after trying it myself and having a lot of fun discussions with everyone present, my interpretation of SynthV 2's purpose is that it's more a revamp that organizes the existing features of SynthV 1 and locks in a new future-proof design language for the engine. Starting us off, phoneme timing has been reworked and behaves more in line with editors like VoiceOwner. Nothing huge to say about this one, this is just a good improvement and a huge step up over the original system in SVS 1, which felt more like playing a game of telephone with the phoneme lengths. Literally the only nitpick I have about this is it means in SVS 2, they removed the phonemes being visible on the waveform like in SVS 1, so you kind of have to glance up and down a bit, but it's no big deal. Next, the vocal modes rework. For those who don't know, SynthV AI banks have a series of expressions you can choose from and blend together, like soft or bold, and SynthV 2 allows for more nuanced control over these modes. In SynthV 2, you'll be able to mix and match 3 separated characteristics of a vocal mode to create never-before-seen combinations. These 3 separated characteristics being the pitch model, the timbre or tone, and the pronunciation. So if, say for example, you want a voice bank to give a powerful tone, but pronunciation-wise you want it to sound a bit more strained or mumbled, you could equip just the timbre of the power expression and just the pronunciation of a soft expression to create a more reserved and muted power vocal, without the actual level of power in the voice being affected by the soft expression's timbre. The immediate use I see this for is being able to pick and choose between stronger and weaker vocal characteristics on a per voice bank basis. I've definitely used some modes before where I want to change the tone of voice, but I don't necessarily like the way certain phonemes sound when using that mode. But on top of that, it's wonderful for customization. When trying SVS 2 at NAMM, the demo terminals would have files already open to mess around with the interface, but as it's a busy and fast-moving environment and you don't want to hog the machines, it makes sense that I have no way of telling what it will actually be like in my workflow at home, and I unfortunately didn't think to bring any project files with me. But all the same, just from messing around with a few expression dials, I was able to adjust very familiar voice banks into expressional baselines that I would never have been able to accomplish in SynthV 1. I can't say for certain, don't quote me on this, but it's to the point where I even think some but not all of the standard parameters sound a bit cleaner in SynthV 2. Like when I was using Solaria 2 over at the Eclipsed Sounds booth, through use of the vocal mode rework and the gender parameter, I was able to make a gender bend vocal that sounded like a genuine masculine voice bank as opposed to a feminine bank with its formant turned up. But with all of that said, before anyone gets excited, the tension parameter still continues to have aged poorly. It was a very cool param back in the R1 days when we didn't have AI banks, but even on SynthV 2, using tension on a vocal just risks deep frying them. But at least I don't mind it as much now I have more control over the vocal modes. And as another aside, this was something myself and the other attendees at the event noticed but didn't want to say initially, as it could have just been a beta quirk, but when you go onto Dreamtonics' store and listen to the samples of their upgraded voice banks, what you'll notice as you cycle through songs is cross-lingual synthesis, the ability for banks banks to sing in other languages sounds significantly different compared to how it did in SynthV 1. In SynthV 1, XLS converted banks into sounding a bit more native regardless of their recorded language, with Chinese and Japanese banks often sounding very smoothed out and Americanized when set to English. But here in SynthV 2, it seems that every bank's recorded accent is more strongly preserved in XLS. Most notably, Chinese voice banks singing in English and English voice banks singing in Japanese sound much more accented, more so than they did previously. On the whole, I consider this an upside, as I found XLS often had the habit of homogenizing vocal profiles in SynthV 1, making them all sound linguistically similar, and this new implementation will return some of their unique qualities, but nevertheless, you should absolutely keep this in mind if you plan on upgrading any VBs you use XLS on a lot. And lastly, there's the mouth opening param. This one's a bit self-explanatory. It's a new param that controls how open the vocalist's mouth is during a section of your vocal phrase. On the show floor, all I did was set it to the most extreme settings to get an idea of what it distinctly sounds like, but already I can tell this feature is going to be great for more diverse pronunciation. I am someone who, when it comes to tuning, I feel like pronunciation and phoneme spacing often go underutilized and underappreciated. Even on the most skilled tuners, there will be the odd moment where I feel like they use the wrong consonant or the vowel could have been different lengths, that kind of stuff. And even on cutting-edge engines like SynthV, vocalists can at times overemphasize or over-enunciate a phoneme in a way that simply can't be fixed in the current engine. I consider this param to be SynthV 2's silent killer, a param that a lot of people are going to forget to use, but those who do use it are going to receive a huge payoff with it. And that's pretty much all of the new parameters that will allow for more customization within the interface. It's a lot of features that I never really knew I wanted, but straight away I can see how they'll all come in handy as I work on any new projects. But that was more the tip of the iceberg. One of the areas where I felt Dreamtonics' coverage of SynthV 2 could have done with more clarification to reduce backlash that I wanted to go into detail with is tuning. And yes, you can laugh, I say it with the CH phoneme, we originated the language or something like that. Before I get into the big thing that everyone's wondering, SynthV 2's tuning interface is just a lot better. Basically, SynthV 1 had a habit of being really clunky and unresponsive to manual tuning. The software houses very detailed and realistic sounding voice banks, and so customizing them was a bit of a nightmare because the pitch deviation would be treated as its own parameter independent of the software's render, so it would sound really forced and uncanny like you were using new tone or Melodyne or something, rather than actually adjusting the output. This system of pitch deviation was fine in concatenative engines, where the voices already sound relatively digitized and distorted, but as voicebank clarity has advanced over the years, it slowly started to show its age and clash even more. This is going to be an extremely hot take and is not universally applicable, but SynthV Studio 1 was a cutting-edge, next-gen vocal synth engine that sounded truly phenomenal, so long as you didn't do your own tuning on it. SynthV 2, to contrast, actually re-renders the pitch model relative to how you're tuning it, so your manual tuning doesn't sound like it's been forced in at the last minute. It's very difficult to describe, but on the whole, I found using pitch deviation in SynthV 2 very comfortable, because I would put in my usual dynamics, and the engine would adapt them in a way that the editor was accustomed to. Again, previewing an editor made for long-term projects at a trade show using finished project files only tells me so much, but I do firmly believe that SynthV 2 did what I wanted it to do straight away, without me wanting to pull my hair out like SynthV 1 would sometimes do. And to make things even better, control points are now baked into notes, thank God! In SynthV 1, pitch deviation was always handled independently of the notes, but now when you copy and paste any vocal phrases from your clipboard in SynthV 2, the tuning is preserved, which is a huge advantage for expediting the manual tuning process without fidgeting with individual control points. For those who use Auto has been given a series of reworks to make it more nuanced and customizable as well, like the expression matrix that let you specify what kind of render you want, and a rework of the take system where you can pick and choose what traits the system should keep and what it should re-render. So if you like a pitch line, but you want the software to have another go at re-rendering just the timing, SynthV 2 does that now. I'm not an auto user myself, but for reasons I'll go over in my next point, I'm glad these reworks are here. So here's where things get difficult and break into a whole can of worms. For those unaware, SynthV 1 had 3 vocal modes you could equip to each note: Sing, Rap, and Manual. The difference between Sing and Manual is that Sing would automatically tune the note based on vocal dynamics trained from the voice provider's vocal data, while Manual would be entirely flat and level for the user to tune the note entirely on their own. For years, the Vocalsynth community has been frequently debating about Auto and its place in the editor, but all you really need to know is that in SynthV 1, you could choose choose between the two, and manual used to be the default mode of tuning in Vocalsynths overall, before auto became the more adopted pitch style in commercial AI editors like Vocaloid 6 and Voiceona. Where things kinda went uncertain in SynthV 2's details was when viewers noticed the absence of manual mode in the live stream, and when I was doing live coverage of NAMM on social media, the most requested information was, does SynthV 2 still have manual mode? Did they take it out, and are they now forcing us to use auto? So yeah, the weight of the world was on my shoulders and I was afraid. The most direct possible answer is that manual mode, explicitly as we know it, is no more. As in, the button is not there and you have to utilize auto in some form. So let's go into detail of what that means exactly. When using the editor itself, my first instinct was to check the voice and note properties to confirm that there was no manual button in sight, and it wasn't there, just sing and rap. So I decided to look for any mentions of manual mode in more niche areas to try and confirm that it at least exists within SynthV 2, and I was really close at one point, which was the note default pitch mode setting, where the user specifies which mode they want new notes to be created in by default. However, setting it to manual did absolutely nothing when I made new notes, which means one of two things. Either that setting is only there for project file compatibility with SVPs made in SynthV 1, or because SynthV 2 is still a work in progress, the NAMM build potentially had some leftover elements from SynthV 1 kicking around that I as an attendee was probably not supposed to see, sorry. So no, I wasn't able to straight away produce a pitch result that was similar to what could be found in manual mode in SynthV 1, but while I had absolutely no way of confirming it on the show floor, I have a gut feeling that if there's SVP file compatibility, or at least the ability to convert files between the two editors, that should mean there'll be a workaround in place where existing SynthV 1 users could potentially re-render their files in manual and then transfer them to SynthV 2 afterwards. Not that it's necessarily practical or ideal, and again, I cannot confirm it, but I don't know, it might be a possibility for us to try out on launch day. So after all this, I struck up a conversation with Dreamtonics over at their booth, and I asked directly with no ambiguity about manual mode. Now, keep in mind that it was a busy, loud environment, and I wasn't concerned with noting down every direct quote, so I'm only paraphrasing. But effectively, what I was told to my memory is that Dreamtonics' focus with SynthV 2 is to decrease the number of overlapping but separated tuning systems in SynthV and try and make one universal workflow that everybody uses. And a part of that philosophy was designing SynthV 2 in a way that marries automatic and manual tuning into one unified interface rather than users picking between one or the other. I had then discovered upon further investigation throughout the week that there is a pretty straightforward method of minimizing but not eliminating the effects of automatic tuning, thanks to the more nuanced automatic interface. In the expression matrix, if you set the entire file to a stable render and then decrease vibrato modulation, that creates a very simple, very workable format that leaves plenty of room for manual tuning. I will be dissecting what that result looked like in a moment, but rest assured, while in this footage it doesn't look entirely perfect and there's still some pitch bends lying around, it still feels like a flat result auditorily, and I think that will appeal to manual tuners while still enforcing Dreamtonics' new design philosophy. So that was the extent of what I was directly informed and demonstrated with SynthV 2 while at NAMM. Now I want to elaborate on what I saw from exclusively my own perspective and interpretation. Based on what I saw at NAMM, I surmise that SynthV 2 represents a very necessary and warranted turning point for the engine's long-term utility. It just unfortunately means it needs to enact some amount of damage control in order to accomplish these goals. The first incarnation of SynthV Studio as of writing this video is a matter of months away from being 5 years old. Additionally, when it first launched, SynthV 1 only had standard concatenative voicebanks available, with SynthV AI not being introduced until a handful of months later. The editor has since gone through multiple iterations to further optimize and accommodate the uncharted characteristics of making voicebanks using deep learning. In other words, SynthV Studio 1 was an experimental playground that has unfortunately compounded on itself with conflicting mechanics and ideas that have all aged in varying degrees and fail to synergize, to the point where it has an impact on the end user. And SynthV 2 appears to be designed as a rework that exclusively preserves and prioritizes what is relevant to the engine right this moment. Speaking personally, I have not always been 100% satisfied with SynthV Studio 1's long-term support, as every new implementation felt like it was an improvement on paper, but in in practice was just another tab, or another window, or another tuning mechanism that clogged up the interface and disrupted my traditional workflow. From new synthesis methods that would drastically alter the output of existing voice banks, to new automated features that had to be navigated or otherwise disabled, and elements of the editor that were already present being deprioritized or otherwise did not have necessary updates to work effectively with modern voicebank releases. While SVS2 required me to readjust and retranslate my traditional vocal synth workflow, once it grew on me, I started to understand that SynthV 1 simply doesn't hold up as an interface in 2025, and I don't think that's shocking, because if other editor releases like Vocaloid are anything to go by, 5 years is a very reasonable turnaround for a new, updated interface that is custom made for how the vocal synth industry of today is utilizing this software, both developers and users. And to reiterate, I'm not saying that tuning as a concept is dead and we're paving the way for automatic tuning being standardized. I am not an auto advocate, but what I am saying is this realigned focus to the interface is going to make the experience universally better for multiple types of vocal synth tuners, so we're not drowning in the overwhelming wake of multiple conflicting non-committal concepts. Like I mentioned before, one of the major benefits of overlapping the automatic and manual pitch system is that manual inputs will influence and prompt what the automatic system provides, harboring a more consistent workflow that complements the type of voice banks that Dreamtonics want SynthV to offer. When you look at my footage of the editor running a stable automatic render with minimal vibrato, the only significant pitch bends are of consonant dips, pitch bends that do not impact the delivery of the notes themselves, but are just more natural consonant renders in order to make the pronunciation less uncanny. I can't speak for the entire render or the universal utility of this method, but in this instance I was demonstrated an example of a project file that only tuned parts of the phrase that pertain to the clarity of the output and not its stylization, providing plenty of room for me to implement my own tuning. Upon reflection, there's a part of me that wonders if, branding-wise, the community at large would have been more charitable to SynthV 2 if it was presented not as a successor to SynthV 1, but instead as an optional pro branch, because there's a lot of really good elements to its backend functionality at the cost of suddenly and unceremoniously removing a lot of greatly utilized features for the sake of streamlining and optimization. As it currently stands, I do not think what SynthV 2 offers will change the minds of anyone who was previously critical of SynthV as a whole, i.e. people who disagree with realism in vocal synths. The industry at large has branched out in multiple ways, leading to audiences with differing values and ideals of what vocal synthesis should be, and SynthV 2 emboldens the ideals Dreamtonics have had for years. But anyone who continues to be a fan of the software to this day, and was just initially uncertain what the reworks mean for you and your workflow, I choose to believe at this time that SynthV 2 is simply realigning its priorities to foster your workflow more effectively, even if you aren't an auto user. But like I said, this is all a work in progress and I can only speak for myself, so we'll just have to see whether or not this optimism follows through as the year progresses. Based on the information I gathered at NAMM and what I inferred from it all, I choose to boil my experience down to two major talking points I want to elaborate on and pass on to the community before I finish up. Because all in all, NAMM this year felt like a microcosm of exciting and fun, but nevertheless significant and uncertain turning points for the vsynth industry that we will need to keep in mind as we function within its ecosystem. The first being the role of generative AI in vocal synths. Just in case anyone is new to my work and unfamiliar with my values, while I function within the vocal synthesizer community, a space that is currently using AI to produce digital vocals, I do not approve of instances of what is currently named in the zeitgeist unethical generative AI, like image, video, and music generation, or using language models to write creative, academic, or other recreational texts. Not only are a lot of these technologies trained using unlicensed data without the consent of the rights holders, but even with that, they would be unethical regardless, because they have the ability to act as a substitute to the creative process rather than assisting in manual creation. Vocal synthesis programs with manual notation interfaces are considered an example of assistive ethical usage, not only because it has an extended history prior to AI where it utilized concatenative sampling, and not only because significant members of its industry work with consenting, compensated voice providers, but when partaking in vsynth notation, there is still a manual creative process involved, be it the element of songwriting or the act of customizing the vocalist's tone and dynamics. Nowadays, communities on social media have aimed to develop a sense of nuance to discussions on AI by explicitly referring to generative AI as a strict categorization of all AI that is unethical and needs to be legislated. However, I want to offer an alternate perspective, as all this categorization has done is introduce a reductive buzzword to a conversation that has not truly developed in the grand scheme. AI in vocal synthesis is generative AI. When Hatsune Miku eventually releases as an AI voice bank for Vocaloid 6, that will mean Hatsune Miku is generative AI. At no point do AI models utilize the vocalist's raw recordings in the same way concatenative sampling does, to the point where AI voice banks are significantly smaller in file size due to not containing any audio or pre-rendered cache files. While the interface is more abstract than an AI image generator, the act of working on a project file equates to constructing a very detailed prompt, whereby the AI vocal synth generates an output based on its currently loaded model. And I think SynthV 2 further cements this reality through its more sophisticated unity between automatic and manual tuning, where a user's own hand-drawn dynamics have a direct hand in the seeded result the AI produces. Despite this generative classification, I do not consider Synthesizer V or other similar instances of commercial AI vocal synths like Vocaloid 6 or Voiceowner to be unethical at this time, because their status as generative has absolutely no bearing on their ethics. AI vocal synthesis represents a fatal flaw in discussions of AI, where if we want to draw a distinction between ethical and unethical usage, it needs to be based on the artistic integrity of its usage and the tangible consequences of using such tools towards our culture and society, as opposed to whether or not the tool itself possesses the characteristics to fit into an arbitrary classification. Not only does the approach of generative versus not generative misdirect the discussion into irrelevant talking points, but it places the core of the discussion entirely on the technology itself, as opposed to assessing the nature of the creative process and reaching an emotional understanding with the individuals who could be harmed by this technology. And I think if we want to start truly caring about the livelihoods of creatives, we need to reframe the whole thing. As I mentioned before, vocal synthesis has existed long before the incorporation of AI, so I firmly believe, because this industry has the ability to function and commercialize without it, we have a moral duty to stand by and support talents and creatives who have understandable concerns regarding this software, even if future legislative action were to put us at risk. And we need to consider these distinctions and interact with these ecosystems on good faith, simply because of the fact that this technology is very real and isn't going away. So I think it's vital that we readjust our criteria to more clearly identify what is actually a threat to begin with, and not fall victim to labels and categories that literally only exist to make this conversation less challenging. In the age of social media, where everyone has the ability to freely participate in any subject, I'm personally tired of the idea that we need to make abstract concepts even more abstract just for the sake of making it easier to convey to people who frankly do not care enough about the discussion if they're not interested in learning more about it. Otherwise, a lot of very deliberate and authentic artistic expression is going to get caught in the crossfire, and enforcing protections for those around us will become difficult if we're not willing to understand the definitions and distinctions we recklessly throw out into public conversations. The second topic I want to go through is the overconsumption and monopolising of vocal synths. As mentioned prior, I perceive SynthV Studio 2 as a focused reframe of what Dreamtonics wish to accomplish with their software. And as new technology dawns and priorities change with time, I think vocal synths have expanded far enough that we as a community need to have a more critical discussion about vocal synth consumerism and our ability to self-select. Based on the current response to SynthV 2's current details, there are subsections of the community who feel that the engine's newer implementations are exclusionary to their workflow, or their overall approach to how a vocal synthesizer should be executed. But as was made apparent while I was attending NAMM, I don't think it's necessarily fair to say that this community functions as the only primary audience in the industry, or that this branch out is a misstep. Just by being at NAMM, it's clear to me that the focus at Dreamtonics is shifting to developing an outer Western audience, and I think that intimidates the community because just the presumed sentiment of wanting to approach other markets creates this element of alienation, where the fandom at large think other entities look down on us just because they're not playing ball with our pre-existing culture. But the fact of the matter is that Dreamtonics have operated this way ever since SynthV AI first debuted, and most actions under the software that were considered fandom-esque were primarily by virtue of their partners. These actions are far from unexpected relative to their branding and operation in my eyes. SynthV 2 is just a more transparent realignment that clearly communicates to customers what to expect from the future of the software. And as a customer, I much prefer companies being upfront and honest about whether or not they'll take my preferences on board, rather than stick around purely on the basis of undefined possibilities. I encourage us to be critical of SynthV, but what I think clouds the discussion heavily at the moment is the insistence for SynthV to be a one-size-fits-all monopoly engine that can do everything we ask of it, just like Vocaloid was perceived to be years ago, despite the fact that Vocaloid years ago should have demonstrated that not one engine can be the solution to every market demand. In my opinion, some voice banks in this industry do not deliver if they were not conceptualized with the strengths, ecosystem, and product standards the engine itself had established. And like Vocaloid years ago, Synthesizer V does on occasion get mired by voice banks that don't complement SynthV's software focus, suffer in quality as a result, and only get SynthV releases to capitalize on a subset of users that are too stubborn to branch out to other engines. And this insistence of versatility even extends to bad faith interpretations of the voice banks themselves. While I thoroughly enjoyed what I saw of HXVOC and GALENAIA, some of the most common questions I had about the two are whether or not their vocal capabilities extend outside of their specialized genres. And I feel like if you're asking that question, you've already answered whether or not the vocalist is right for you, and you're better off looking somewhere else. The fandom aspect of vocal synthesis is why I'm here. It is the blood of this industry and adds beauty and personality to every step of its history. But I feel like where it becomes excessive is this FOMO-infused collectathon aspect, where we treat new voice banks like new Genshin Impact characters that we need to snatch up as soon as possible. It's been pointed out before, but the release cycle of new voice banks where everyone buys it, posts 1 or 2 covers of them on Twitter, and then never touches them again is very real. And at risk of generalizing, I think that phenomenon is the result of people impulse buying new releases without assessing if the release is right for them. I'm not saying consumers have a 100% responsibility towards their purchasing habits. The nature of business is that every idea has been influenced to you in some form. But what I am saying is things are changing, and moving forward, I highly recommend taking a step back and asking ourselves, did I really need to buy Eleanor AI? Thank you all so much for attending my Ramblefest of NAMM 25. This whole event was just the thing I needed to kick off the new year, and if circumstances allow, you bet I'll be hovering around during NAMM 26 like a scab. Maybe next time I eat at Cheesecake Factory, I'll actually make sure I have enough room to order the goddamn cheesecake, but in the meantime, take it easy, and I'll see you all very soon.